He did this. The words sharp and cold as the steel of a blade cut through the morning silence. Marcus stood there, his face a mask of practiced outrage, his finger pointing directly at Leo. I warned her about him. The boy got greedy. Leo knelt in the straw, the world a dizzying blur of splintered light and the metallic scent of fear. A few feet away, Isabella lay still, an empress on a throne of hay, her vacant eyes reflecting the cold rafters above. His hand trembled, his fingers clenched around the smooth, cold glass of the syringe he had just picked up. The proof. The lie. The end of everything. The sound of approaching sirens grew from a distant cry to an insistent scream, sealing the barn in a bubble of suffocating dread. He was judged, tried, and condemned in the space of a single heartbeat. But they had accused the wrong man, for the wrong crime. Before we uncover the truth of what really happened that morning, make sure you click that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge the line between justice and revenge. A legacy is not built with money. It is forged in silence, in the hard-packed earth of tradition, and in the unspoken rules that govern worlds most people only read about. For Leo, that world had a name: the Windsor Stables. It arrived not as a sound, but as a scent carried on the warm Mediterranean breeze. A perfume of old money, salt-seasoned cypress, and the sweet, earthy smell of thoroughbreds that cost more than the house he'd grown up in. He stood at the wrought-iron gates, a simple backpack slung over his shoulder, his worn jeans and faded t-shirt, a stark contrast to the gilded, rampant stallion crest that adorned the entrance. This was more than a place. It was a dynasty, a fortress of equestrian royalty, and he was an outsider who had somehow been granted entry. The driveway, lined with ancient olive trees, wound its way toward a stable complex that looked more like a Gilded Age mansion. Polished brass nameplates gleamed on the doors of each stall, bearing names like Solstice Kingmaker and Requiem. Men with weathered faces and ramrod-straight postures moved with a quiet efficiency, their riding boots echoing softly on the cobblestones. They glanced at Leo, their eyes holding a neutral but probing curiosity. He was a visitor in a land where everyone else belonged. At the heart of the stables stood Marcus, the head trainer. He was a man in his late 40s, built like a retired boxer, with a face that seemed permanently chiseled into an expression of faint disapproval. He wore his authority like a well-tailored leather jacket, effortlessly and with an intimidating comfort. When he saw Leo approach, he didn't extend a hand. He simply watched him, his arms crossed his gaze, sweeping over Leo from his worn sneakers to his tired eyes. "You're the student," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. It was a classification, a label meant to put Leo in his place from the very first breath. Isabella has a soft spot for charity cases. Don't get comfortable. The last one didn't make it through the week. Leo met his gaze, his own voice steady despite the knot tightening in his stomach. "I'm here to work, Mr. Thorne, not get comfortable." Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. "Just call me Marcus. We don't do titles here unless you've earned them." He turned, gesturing for Leo to follow. "Your project is in the North Paddock. Tempest." The name was spoken with a mix of reverence and frustration. Tempest wasn't just a horse. He was a living legend. A stallion of impossible beauty, black as a starless night, with a racing record that had made the Windsor name synonymous with victory. But the legend was broken. After a mysterious injury 6 months prior, Tempest had become a storm of black muscle and fury, unrideable, untouchable, lashing out at any vet or trainer who dared to get close. He was the stable's most valuable asset and its most dangerous secret. As they approached the paddock, Leo could feel the tension radiating from the enclosure. Tempest stood alone in the far corner, his head high, his body a tense sculpture of coiled power. His coat, which should have gleamed, was dull, and a faint tremor ran through his powerful hind legs. Two stable hands stood at a safe distance, their faces etched with caution. "He's your problem now," Marcus said, a cynical smirk playing on his lips. "Isabella thinks some kid with a fancy scholarship and a textbook full of theories can fix what seasoned professionals couldn't. Show me what you've got." It was a challenge, a public test designed for failure. Marcus leaned against the fence, arms crossed again, a king watching a peasant attempt to tame his dragon. The other stable hands paused their work, their gazes following Leo as he unlatched the gate. He didn't carry a medical kit, no syringe, no tools of his trade. He walked in with nothing but his quiet confidence. Leo didn't approach the horse. He walked to the center of the paddock and sat down on the grass, cross-legged his back to the formidable stallion. The silence stretched, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the cypress trees. Marcus's smirk faltered, replaced by a look of confusion. The stable hands exchanged puzzled glances. This wasn't how you handled a volatile, half-ton animal. For 10 minutes, Leo sat perfectly still. He closed his eyes, listening. He listened to the rhythm of Tempest's agitated breathing, the nervous shuffle of his hooves on the turf, the distant cry of a gull overhead. He wasn't trying to impose his will. He was offering an absence of threat, a pocket of peace in the horse's world of pain and fear. Slowly, the stallion's frantic breathing began to even out. The restless stomping ceased. Curiosity began to war with aggression in the animal's dark, intelligent eyes. Tempest took one hesitant step forward, then another, his powerful neck outstretched, his nostrils flaring as he took in the scent of this strange, calm human who demanded nothing of him. Leo didn't turn. He began to speak, his voice, a low, steady murmur, not much louder than the wind. He wasn't speaking to the horse, not directly. He was telling a story, a memory from his own childhood, about a stray dog he had found scared and hurt, and how he had sat with it for hours, just letting it know it wasn't alone. Tempest inched closer, the space between them, shrinking with a caution that felt sacred. He lowered his head, the great, powerful arc of his neck bending until his muzzle was just inches from Leo's shoulder. He huffed a warm, moist breath against Leo's shirt. Leo slowly, deliberately turned his head. For the first time, he looked the stallion directly in the eye. He saw not just rage, but a profound and heartbreaking fear. "I know," Leo whispered, his voice thick with an empathy that transcended species. "I know it hurts." He didn't move to touch the horse. He didn't have to. The connection was already made, a silent understanding that passed between two beings who knew what it was to be wounded. From a window, high in the main villa, hidden behind sheer lace curtains, Isabella Windsor watched the scene unfold through a pair of antique opera glasses. She saw the challenge in Marcus's posture. She saw the skepticism on the faces of her staff. And she saw the young man who didn't try to conquer the storm, but instead offered it a place to rest. A faint, knowing smile touched her lips for the first time in months. This boy, she thought, was different. He didn't just understand horses. He understood the language of silence. And in her world, that was the most valuable language of all. Some bonds are not spoken. They are felt. The summons came less than an hour later. A house servant, a woman with a starched white apron and an expression just as stiff, found Leo by the paddock. "Mrs. Windsor will see you in the sunroom," she announced, her tone implying that this was a rare and significant honor. As Leo followed her through the villa's sprawling corridors, he felt the oppressive weight of accumulated history. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their painted eyes following him down halls silenced by thick Persian rugs. Every surface gleamed, mahogany tables, silver heirlooms, crystal vases, all reflecting a life so far removed from his own, it felt like another dimension. Isabella Windsor was not what he expected. The woman seated in a high-backed wicker chair was not the fragile, reclusive widow from tabloid mythology. She was 71, yes, and her hands resting on a cashmere lap blanket were thin and papery, but her eyes were sharp and fiercely intelligent. They missed nothing. She watched him as he entered her gaze, as probing as a surgeon's scalpel. "Mr. Thorne tells me you have a way with horses," she began, her voice, a low, cultured timbre, surprisingly strong. He, however, neglected to mention you employ methods more suited to a Buddhist monk than a veterinarian. Leo felt a flush of heat rise to his cheeks. "I just listened, Mum. Sometimes animals just need to be heard." Isabella gestured to the chair opposite her, a skill sadly lacking in most humans as well. "Sit." He did. For a long moment, she simply studied him. "Marcus believes your success with Tempest was a fluke." A lucky guess. "Luck had nothing to do with it," Leo replied quietly. "The horse is in pain, and he's afraid. The anger is just a symptom of that." Isabella's expression softened a subtle shift that changed the entire landscape of her face. Pain and fear. Yes, a familiar combination. She leaned forward slightly. "You're the boy from Detroit on the Atherton Scholarship, top of your class. Your professors describe you as exceptionally gifted. They did not mention you were also a horse whisperer." He was taken aback that she knew so much about him. "I just try to pay attention." "A rare commodity," she mused, turning her gaze to the manicured gardens beyond the glass. "My own children are experts in demanding attention, but have very little of it to spare." The comment was dropped so casually, yet it was weighted with years of disappointment. It was an offering a small, unguarded piece of herself. He didn't know what to say to that, so he remained silent. His silence seemed to be the correct answer. She turned back to him. "Marcus has been with me for 20 years. He is the best trainer in the country. He is also a man who believes every problem can be broken, tamed, or forced into submission. He does not believe in listening." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "That makes you a threat to him?" "What is your first name?" "Leo, ma'am." "Leo," she repeated the name. "You are a threat because you offer a different kind of power, the quiet kind, and that I've found is often the most potent." Their meetings became a quiet ritual over the next few weeks. They would sit in the sunroom, or sometimes walk slowly through her private rose garden, Tempest often trailing behind Leo like a loyal shadow. Their conversations drifted from veterinary science to literature, from the politics of the racing world to the simple shared experience of loneliness. He told her about his mother, about her quiet strength and her dream of seeing him succeed. She in turn spoke of her late husband, Arthur, a man who built an empire but couldn't build a happy home. This growing intimacy did not go unnoticed by Marcus. He saw the way Isabella's face would light up when Leo arrived. He saw Tempest, his untamable champion, nuzzling the boy's hand for a treat. He saw his own carefully cultivated influence beginning to erode. The confrontation came one afternoon in the main stable. Leo was performing a routine check on Tempest, murmuring softly to the horse, when Marcus appeared, his shadow falling long and dark across the stall door. "Getting awfully close to the family jewels, aren't you, kid?" Marcus's voice was low, laced with venom. Leo straightened up, turning to face him. "I'm doing my job, the one Mrs. Windsor assigned me." Marcus took a step closer, invading Leo's space. "Let me give you some advice. She's a lonely old woman. She feels sorry for you. don't mistake her kindness for opportunity. His eyes were cold, hard chips of ice. This world, it eats boys like you for breakfast. You don't belong here, and the sooner you realize that, the better it will be for everyone. The only thing I'm trying to do, Leo said, his own voice hardening, is figure out why this horse is still in pain. A pain you seem determined to ignore. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Marcus's face tightened, a muscle jumping in his jaw. Before he could retort, Isabella's voice cut through the tension, clear and sharp as glass. Is there a problem here? Marcus. She stood at the end of the stable aisle, her posture, regal her presence, silencing the entire space. Marcus immediately straightened his hostile demeanor, vanishing, replaced by a mask of professional deference. No, Isabella. No problem at all, he said smoothly, just giving the boy some guidance on handling a champion. Isabella's eyes flickered from Marcus to Leo, and she understood everything. I see, she said, her tone clipped. Leo, walk with me. She led him away from the stables, away from the prying eyes of the staff, to a part of the estate he had never seen, before a small stone chapel, covered in ivy, nestled in a grove of cypress trees. Inside it was cool and quiet, the air smelling of old stone and beeswax. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light filtering through a stained glass window. This was my son's, she said softly, her voice echoing in the small space. She ran a hand over a simple wooden pew. Arthur Jr. He died before his 5th birthday, a riding accident. Leo stood in stunned silence, a wave of profound sadness washing over him for this woman he was only just beginning to know. My husband, she continued, her back to him, saw it as a tragedy for the family name, a mark of weakness. He had this chapel built not for mourning, but for appearances. After the funeral, he never spoke of our son again. She finally turned to face him, and her eyes were filled with a grief so old it had become a part of her. Marcus knows this. He was a stable boy then. He saw it all. He understands what this legacy is built on. She was giving him a key, not to a room, but to the complex, painful history of this place. She was trusting him with her deepest wound. I'm so sorry, Leo whispered. It was all he could offer. Don't be sorry, she said, her voice regaining its strength. Be better than them. She looked at him then, with an intensity that made him feel as though she were seeing into his very soul. The world will always try to tell you who you are, Leo. It will judge you by your clothes, your background, your skin. It will try to put you in a box. Don't let it. As they walked back toward the villa, in the fading afternoon light, Isabella made her decision. That evening, she called a formal staff meeting in the main hall. Leo was asked to attend. In front of everyone, including a seething Marcus, Isabella made her announcement. Effective immediately, Leo will have full and sole authority over all medical decisions concerning Tempest. He will report directly to me. His assessments are not to be questioned. The declaration was a seismic shift in the stable's hierarchy. It was a public and unequivocal vote of confidence in Leo and a direct rebuke to Marcus. Leo saw the look on the trainer's face, a fleeting mask of shock, followed by a cold, calculating fury that settled deep in his eyes. It was a look that promised retribution. As the meeting dismissed, Isabella placed a gentle hand on Leo's arm, the quiet kind of power, Leo. She whispered, a sad, knowing look in her eyes. It often invites the loudest storms. Sometimes the most beautiful surfaces hide the deepest rot. Leo's new authority felt less like a promotion and more like a heavy, ill-fitting coat. The stable staff, once openly dismissive, now regarded him with a wary respect that was just another form of distance. They followed his instructions to the letter, their politeness a thin veneer over their allegiance to Marcus. Leo was in charge, but he was still an outsider. He poured himself into his work, using the newfound power, not for status, but for the one thing that mattered to the truth. He began a systematic examination of Tempest, a deep diagnostic dive that went far beyond what Marcus's hand-picked veterinarians had ever attempted. He spent hours with the stallion, not just observing his behavior, but measuring his world in data points, heart rate variability, under stress pupil dilation, in response to light, the subtle catch in his breath after a short gallop. He drew blood samples himself, carefully labeling them and arranging for a trusted off-island lab to run the analysis, bypassing the stable's official channels. He knew Marcus would have eyes and ears everywhere. While he waited for the results, he immersed himself in the stable's rhythms, trying to understand the machine from the inside. He watched Marcus train the other horses, his methods a brutal symphony of force and control. He saw the fear in the animal's eyes, a fear mistaken for discipline. He also saw the money that flowed through Windsor stables, a river of silent transactions, of knowing glances between wealthy owners and the almost invisible network of bookies and bettors who lingered at the edges of the official racing world. One evening, Leo sat in his small Spartan room above the stables, poring over Tempest's lineage records. He was tracing a history of champions, a bloodline of speed and power. But as he cross-referenced the dates with old racing forms, a pattern began to emerge. Every major victory for the Windsor stables in the last 5 years had been preceded by a visit from a specific, little-known veterinary supplier. The same supplier Leo noted with a chill that Marcus had listed as the source for Tempest's nutritional supplements. The bloodwork results arrived via a secure email late the next night. Leo's hands trembled slightly as he opened the encrypted file. The report was a portrait of a body at war with itself. There were no obvious illegal substances, no common steroids or stimulants. It was cleaner and far more sinister. The lab identified markers of severe adrenal fatigue, micro tears in the muscle tissue, inconsistent with normal exertion, and buried deep in the toxicology screen, an unidentifiable synthetic peptide. It was a ghost in the machine, a designer drug engineered to boost performance while remaining virtually undetectable. It was the kind of thing that created champions and then destroyed them from the inside out. The printout felt heavy in his hand, a death warrant written in clinical language. This was the source of Tempest's pain, the reason for his fear-fueled rage. He was being poisoned for victory. Armed with the report, Leo knew he had to confront Marcus. He found him in the tack room, a space that smelled of saddle soap and old leather meticulously polishing a bridle. The rhythmic squeak of the cloth was the only sound. Leo laid the report on the workbench between them. The bloodwork came back, he said, his voice devoid of accusation, a simple statement of fact. Marcus didn't look up from his work. "And did your fancy lab find what you were looking for?" "A ghost." "I found a synthetic peptide," Leo stated. "Undetectable by standard tests. I also found adrenal damage that could cripple him permanently." Marcus finally stopped placing the bridle down with deliberate care. He picked up the report, his eyes scanning the page with feigned curiosity. Then he looked at Leo, and his face was a mask of condescending pity. Peptides, adrenal fatigue. These are words from a book, kid. Out here in the real world, we deal with something called winning. He crumpled the report in his fist, the paper crackling in the silence. You think you've discovered some grand conspiracy. You've discovered what it takes to stay on top. You're destroying him, Leo said, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. No, son. I made him. And I can unmake him. Just like I can unmake the little charity case who thinks he can come into my world and tell me how to run it. He was inches from Leo now, the scent of leather and sweat thick in the air. You're a long way from home, on an island. It's amazing what can happen out here. A fall, a tragic accident. People disappear. You need to decide if finding a ghost is worth becoming one. The threat was no longer veiled. It was a cold, hard promise. Shaken but resolute, Leo went straight to Isabella. He found her in the dimly lit library, a room he'd never been invited into before. She was sitting by the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows on the towering shelves of books. She listened without interruption as he recounted everything: the lab results, the confrontation, the threat. He expected shock, outrage, denial. Instead, he saw a profound weariness settle over her, a deep and ancient sadness. When he finished, she was silent for a long time, staring into the fire. I have always known, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I knew what it took to win. I just chose not to look too closely at the price. She finally turned to him, her eyes clear and sharp. You have confirmed my greatest fear, Leo. This corruption, it runs deeper than just Marcus. He is not the head of the snake, merely one of its fangs. She stood and walked to a heavy oak desk, retrieving a thick, leather-bound ledger. It was Tempest's official medical log. What you found in the blood I have suspected in the soul. But suspicion is not proof. She placed the book in his hands. Continue your work. Document everything. Every observation, every change in Tempest's health, every strange delivery you see. Write it all down in here. Her grip on his arm was surprisingly strong. But you tell no one, not a soul. Trust only what you see with your own eyes, Leo. Here loyalty has many faces, and most of them are masks. He left the library that night, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. He was no longer just a veterinarian. He was an unwilling spy in a silent war, armed with a terrible secret, with only one ally, a woman who seemed to be a prisoner in her own kingdom. The chapter's climax arrived 2 nights later. Unable to sleep, Leo was walking the perimeter of the stables when he saw a flicker of light from the far end of the property, near a secluded service entrance. He moved closer, using the shadows of the cypress trees for cover. He saw Marcus, his silhouette unmistakable, talking to another man. This man was slighter dressed in a dark suit and carried a small metallic briefcase. As Leo watched, Marcus passed the man a thick envelope, and in return received a small insulated cooler bag. It was a transaction, clandestine and illicit. Leo fumbled for his phone, trying to capture a photo, a video, anything, but his foot snapped a dry twig. The sound was a gunshot in the silent night. Both men whipped around, their faces briefly illuminated by the security light on the gate. The second man's face was sharp, unfamiliar, his eyes wide with alarm. Marcus's face was a mask of pure, murderous rage. Leo didn't wait. He turned and ran, his heart hammering against his ribs. The image of Marcus's face burned into his mind. He didn't look back, but he could feel their eyes on him, a physical weight in the darkness. He had been seen. He was no longer just a threat. He was a witness. There are moments that seal a fate long before the end is written. The daylight that followed felt like a lie. The sun was bright, the sky a piercing cloudless blue, but a cold dread had settled deep in Leo's bones. He felt hunted. At breakfast in the staff mess hall, conversations would halt when he entered a room. In the stables, the grooms would busy themselves with unnecessary tasks, their shoulders tense, their eyes refusing to meet his. He was a ghost long before the crime was ever committed. And Marcus was a predator. He no longer bothered with veiled threats. He would stand at a distance watching Leo work with Tempest, his expression a flat, unreadable mask that was more terrifying than open rage. It was the look of a man who was no longer planning but waiting. Leo found his solace inside Tempest's stall. The great horse had become his only confidant. He would lean his head against the stallion's powerful neck, the animal's warmth, a small comfort against the encroaching chill of fear. He meticulously documented everything in the ledger Isabella had given him, his entries becoming more and more detailed. He noted the slight tremor in Tempest's left foreleg after a workout, the cloudy film that sometimes appeared in the horse's eye, the way his breathing hitched when Marcus walked past the stall. These were not just medical notes. They were an indictment, a silent testimony he recorded in neat clinical script. 2 days after the incident at the service gate, the summons came again. This time it was not to the sunroom, but to the deep, intimidating quiet of Isabella's formal study. The room was panelled in dark, imposing oak, dominated by a massive fireplace and a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single ancient tree. A man Leo had never seen before was present on a large screen connected via a secure video call. He was old with a mane of white hair and the weary, intelligent eyes of a seasoned lawyer. Isabella looked different today. She seemed smaller in her large leather chair, more fragile, but her eyes burned with a cold, resolute fire. "Leo, this is Mr. Davenport, my personal attorney," she said, her voice leaving no room for pleasantries. "He is here to bear witness." She gestured for him to sit. "I have made a decision. Marcus Thorne's tenure at Windsor Stables has become a threat to the very legacy I have sworn to protect. His ambition has curdled into a poison, and I will not allow it to infect this family's name any longer." The lawyer on the screen cleared his throat. As per Mrs. Windsor's instructions, he began his voice, a dry rustle of paper. A new codicil has been added to her living trust. In the event of her passing, the management of Windsor Stables will not pass to any single individual. It will be governed by a newly formed equestrian trust. The purpose of this trust will be to preserve the integrity of the Windsor bloodline and champion the cause of ethical clean racing. He paused, his eyes finding Leo's through the screen. "Mrs. Windsor has stipulated that you, Leo, will hold a permanent deciding seat on that board of trustees." The air left Leo's lungs. He stared speechless from the lawyer's stoic face to Isabella's determined one. "Mom, Isabella, I can't. I'm just a student. You are the only person on this island who has put the well-being of an animal above the value of a trophy." Isabella cut in, her voice sharp. "You are the only one who has spoken the truth in a place built on beautiful lies. I am not giving you money, Leo. I am giving you a responsibility. This legacy needs a guardian, not an owner." After the lawyer disconnected, the room was shrouded in a heavy silence. Isabella pushed the thick, leather-bound logbook across the desk toward him. It was the official medical ledger he had been using. "This book," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "is now the most important thing on this island. When the storm comes, and this will be your only compass, you must trust what you see in these pages, not what you hear from the mouths of men. Protect it with your life, Leo. It is more valuable than any horse, any fortune. It is the truth." She looked at him, a desperate plea in her eyes. "Do you understand what I am asking of you?" He didn't, not fully, but he saw the fear beneath her resolve, and he nodded. "I understand." He left the study with the heavy book clutched to his chest, the weight of it both a burden and an anchor. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the core that a line had been crossed, A war had been declared. He didn't have to wait long for the first shot to be fired. How Marcus found out, Leo would never know. Perhaps it was a whisper from a frightened servant or a paid informant in the lawyer's office. But that evening, as Leo was leaving the stables, Marcus blocked his path. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows across the cobblestones, and Marcus's face was a twisted mask of fury. "I know what you did," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You and that old fool. You think you've won. You think a piece of paper and a seat at a table make you one of them." He laughed, a raw, ugly sound. "You're a bug, son. A bug to be stepped on. You have no idea the game you're playing or the players involved." He took a step forward, his chest bumping against Leo's. "You think you're her guardian, her protector. You haven't protected her. You've just signed her death warrant. You and that old woman have made a grave mistake." He held Leo's gaze for a second longer, his eyes promising a world of pain. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the deepening twilight. That night, Leo sat in his room, the logbook open on his small desk. The air was thick with the scent of an approaching storm. He couldn't shake the feeling of dread, the chilling finality in Marcus's words. He looked out his window down toward the main stables. A single light burned in Marcus's office. He could see his silhouette pacing back and forth, a caged animal planning its escape. Leo felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to go to Isabella, to warn her, to do something. But what? What could he do against a man like Marcus, against a system of power he was only just beginning to comprehend? He clutched the logbook tighter. This is the truth. Her words echoed in his mind. He was terrified, more terrified than he had ever been in his life. But beneath the fear, a new feeling was taking root, a cold, hard resolve. He was the guardian of this book. He was the guardian of her truth. And come what may, he would not fail her. The first fat drops of rain began to splatter against his window pane, like tears from a grieving sky. The storm was here. The morning always comes, but sometimes it brings the dark. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving a world washed clean and unnervingly still. The air that drifted through Leo's open window was cool and heavy, with the smell of wet earth and salt. He hadn't slept. Marcus's final chilling words had echoed in his mind all night, a venomous counterpoint to the thunder. He swung his legs out of bed, a deep, primal unease compelling him to move. He had to see Tempest. He had to know the horse was safe. He dressed in the grey pre-dawn light, pulling on his worn jeans and a sweatshirt. The stable complex was silent as a tomb when he arrived. The usual symphony of morning sounds, the soft nickering of horses, the clatter of feed buckets, the low murmur of the stable hands, was absent. It was a dead quiet, a held breath. The silence felt wrong, unnatural. A single security light cast long, skeletal shadows across the cobblestones. As he neared Tempest's stall, the feeling of dread intensified. The heavy oak door, always meticulously latched and bolted, was slightly ajar. A cold fist clenched in Leo's gut. He pushed the door open. The scene inside was a nightmare painted in shadow and straw. Isabella lay on the floor, her body twisted at an unnatural angle, a cascade of silver hair spread like a halo around her head. Her eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the rafters above. Her elegant cashmere robe was torn, and a dark, ugly bruise was beginning to form on her temple. A few feet away, Tempest stood trembling, his powerful body drenched in sweat, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond mere agitation. He snorted a low guttural sound of fear and stamped a hoof, sending a shiver through the floorboards. For a moment, Leo's mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. The world dissolved into a silent, slow-motion horror. Then his training, his instincts as a healer took over. He rushed to her side, his fingers fumbling for a pulse at her neck, finding only the cold, still finality of death. He checked for breath, for any sign of life, but there was nothing. She was gone. A raw, guttural cry of no escaped his lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. His gaze darted around the stall, searching for an explanation, for anything that made sense of this madness. And then he saw it. A small, glinting object, half buried in the clean straw, near Isabella's outstretched hand. It was a glass syringe, empty. What had been in it? What had they given the horse to make him do this? The question screamed in his mind, overriding his shock. Driven by a desperate clinical need to understand, he reached down and picked it up, holding it to the faint light. He saw the residue of a clear liquid inside. He didn't know it then, but it was the single most catastrophic mistake of his life. Get away from her. The shout was like a physical blow. Leo spun around. A young stable hand, his face white with horror, stood in the doorway, his eyes locked on Leo, kneeling over Isabella's body, the syringe held in his hand. The stable hand didn't see a healer. He didn't see a grieving friend. He saw a killer. He did it, the boy screamed, his voice cracking. He's killed her! Help! Somebody help! The scream shattered the morning silence. Doors flew open. Figures came running from every direction, their faces a mixture of sleep-addled confusion and dawning horror. And at the front of the crowd was Marcus. Leo watched him approach, expecting to see shock, perhaps even sadness. But Marcus's face was a mask of cold, calculated triumph. He took in the scene, Isabella's body, the terrified horse, and Leo frozen in place with the syringe in his hand, and a flicker of a smile touched his lips before he erased it. "Don't let him get away!" Marcus bellowed, his voice ringing with an authority that seized control of the chaos. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Leo. "He's the one I warned her. I told her he couldn't be trusted." The stable hands loyal to Marcus formed a loose circle around Leo, their faces a mixture of fear and suspicion. Leo, still reeling, tried to speak. "No, you don't understand. I just found her." "Found her?" Marcus scoffed, stepping forward. "Or finished the job. We all know about the Will boy. We all know she was about to give you everything." He turned to the assembled staff. He got greedy. He couldn't wait. He must have drugged the horse to make it go mad. The narrative was perfect, simple and damning. And Leo, holding the physical proof of his own guilt, had no way to fight it. The police arrived within 15 minutes, their sirens a piercing shriek that announced the end of Leo's world. The scene they found seemed to confirm Marcus's story in every horrible detail. A dead billionaire, a poor black student who had mysteriously gained her favor, a last-minute change to the will, and the student kneeling over the body, holding what appeared to be the murder weapon. He was after her money from the start, Marcus told the lead detective, his voice a performance of perfect, sorrowful conviction. He manipulated a lonely old woman, and when she gave him an inch, he took everything. I tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen. Leo was separated, questioned, his words tumbling out in a confused, incoherent torrent of grief and shock. He tried to explain about the doping, about his suspicions, about the logbook locked in his room. But to the detectives, it sounded like the desperate, frantic rambling of a guilty man trying to invent a conspiracy. His protests were drowned out by the cold, hard facts of the scene before them. His fingerprints were on the syringe. His motive was on paper in a lawyer's office. His presence at the scene was undeniable. The final irrevocable moment came with a sound that would haunt Leo's dreams for the rest of his life, the sharp metallic click of handcuffs closing around his wrists. The cold steel bit into his skin, a physical manifestation of the trap that had just snapped shut around him. "You're under arrest," the detective said, his voice flat, emotionless. As they led him from the stable, a small crowd of staff had gathered. They stared at him, their faces now holding a certainty that mirrored the detective's. They saw a murderer. He was being escorted past the manicured lawns, the ancient olive trees, the gilded stallion on the gate. His last sight was of Marcus, standing by the entrance to the main villa, watching him go. And on the trainer's face, for just a moment, was an unmistakable expression of pure, unadulterated victory. The storm had passed, and it had left only devastation in its wake. In the deepest darkness, a single flicker of truth can light the way. Prison was not a place, it was a state of erasure. In the weeks that turned into a disorienting year, Leo learned that the first thing you lose is not your freedom, but your name. You become a number, a jumpsuit, a statistic. The outside world, with its sunlight and seasons and choices, fades into a distant, unbelievable memory. The trial had been a formality, a piece of theatre where his guilt was the predetermined conclusion. Marcus's testimony, a masterpiece of feigned grief and righteous accusation, had painted Leo as a cunning, sociopathic predator. The jury, faced with the simple, ugly picture of a poor black kid and a dead white billionaire, had delivered their verdict in under 4 hours. Life became a series of grey repeating moments, the metallic clang of a cell door, the soulless hum of fluorescent lights that never went out, the taste of food that was more about function than flavour. He learned the geography of his confinement, the cracks in the concrete wall of his cell, the scuff marks on the floor of the common room, the precise number of steps it took to walk the perimeter of the yard. He learned to make himself small, to speak only when spoken to build a wall of silence around himself as a form of protection. His innocence was a fragile, useless thing here, a language no one else spoke. His only connection to the world he had lost was the leather-bound logbook. After weeks of pleading with his overwhelmed public defender, the book had finally been released from evidence and delivered to him, along with his other meager personal effects. At first, he couldn't bring himself to open it. It felt like touching a fresh wound. It was a relic from a life that had been stolen from him, a reminder of Isabella's trust, a trust that had ultimately led him to this cage. But as the months bled into one another, the book became his only anchor. In the suffocating quiet of his cell, long after the final count and the echoing slam of bolts, he would open its pages. He wasn't looking for anything. He was just visiting. He would trace her elegant, slanted handwriting, remembering the conversations that had accompanied the entries. He remembered the day she'd written, "Tempest seems melancholic. Perhaps he misses the sea." He remembered how they had walked the horse down to the shore that afternoon, and how the great stallion had stood mesmerized by the crashing waves. He read the entries over and over hundreds of times until he had them memorized. They were his scripture, his last will and testament from a life that was no longer his. The despair was a physical weight, a constant pressure behind his eyes. He was forgotten. A footnote in a sensational story that the world had already moved on from. He was beginning to forget himself, the edges of the boy who had dreamed of healing animals, blurring into the hardened, silent man who now lived by bells and bars. The change came on a cold winter night nearly 2 years into his sentence. A lockdown had been called, trapping him in his cell for 48 hours straight. The silence was absolute, broken only by the drip of a leaky pipe somewhere down the hall. He had nothing but the cot, the toilet, and the book. He opened it again, his fingers tracing the familiar script. But this time something was different. Perhaps it was the profound stillness, or the sheer soul-crushing boredom. But his mind, the sharp, analytical mind that had gotten him into veterinary school, began to see not just the words, but the patterns beneath them. He remembered her final urgent instruction: trust what you see, not what people say. Only you can understand its language. He had always assumed she meant to trust his instincts as a veterinarian. But what if she meant something more literal? What if the book itself was a language? He turned to a page he knew by heart, an entry from the week before her death. Administered vitamin B12 supplement 2 followed by mineral oil. 50 ml. Tempest's coat shows a remarkable new sheen. It was a mundane entry, one he'd read 100 times, but his eyes snagged on the numbers. 2 and 15. The 2nd and 15th letters of the alphabet, B and O. He dismissed it. A coincidence. He flipped to another page. An entry about a hoof treatment. Applied copper sulfate solution 3 grams. Then a saline flush 150 ml. He paused. There was no standard veterinary practice that used a 3-gram measurement for that solution. But if he looked at the numbers, 3 and 15. C and O. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. He scrambled through the pages, his hands shaking, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He found another entry she had circled, one that had always puzzled him. Observed a slight arrhythmia, 4 beats per minute above baseline, followed by a standard tranquilizer, 16 milliliter to calm. 4 and 16. D and P. He grabbed a stub of a pencil, his mind racing, connecting the dots, seeing the ghost of a message emerge from the clinical prose. He looked for the entries she had marked, with a tiny, almost invisible star in the margin. He transcribed the numbers, converted them to letters. B, O, O, K, I, I, E, D, O, P, I, N, G, M, Y, A, R, C, U, S. The words materialized on the crumpled piece of toilet paper he was using for notes. It wasn't a medical log. It was a diary of a crime. It was a coded confession, a message from the grave. She had known. She had known about the doping, about Marcus, about the depth of the corruption. She had been documenting it, hiding it in plain sight, in a language that only he, the vet student, could possibly decipher. The full, horrific realization crashed over him. Her death, the syringe, the perfect frame-up. It wasn't just Marcus's plan, it was hers. She had known she was going to die either by her illness or by Marcus's hand. So she had taken control. She had orchestrated her own exit, creating a spectacle so massive it would force the world to look. She had framed him, yes, but she had also armed him. She had sacrificed him, her trusted friend, but she had also left him the key to his own salvation and her ultimate justice. He leaned his head against the cold concrete wall, the logbook clutched to his chest. He wasn't crying. The feeling was too vast, too complex for tears. It was a terrifying cocktail of betrayal grief and a new, brilliant, blinding hope. Isabella hadn't abandoned him. She had entrusted him with her final desperate and magnificent move in a game that was rigged against them both. He was no longer a victim rotting in a cell. He was the keeper of her truth. He was the only person on earth who knew what she had done and why. The despair that had been his constant companion for 2 years evaporated, burned away by a surge of pure, cold purpose. The silence of the prison no longer felt like an erasure. It felt like a prelude. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. Truth, once awakened, does not go back to sleep. The man who woke up in cell block D the next morning was not the same one who had collapsed onto the cot the night before. The despair, a heavy, suffocating blanket, had been replaced by a sharp, cold clarity. Leo was no longer a victim adrift in a sea of injustice. He was a navigator, and the logbook was his chart. Isabella had given him a weapon, and he now knew how to wield it. His first move required a leap of faith. He used his one phone call for the week not to speak to his public defender, but to dial a number he knew by heart, the direct line to the office of Dr. Alistair Finch, his former mentor at the veterinary school. Finch was a man of science, a brilliant but cantankerous academic who despised foolishness and valued evidence above all else. Leo Finch's voice crackled through the receiver, thick with surprise and concern. My God, son, I'd heard. I didn't know who to call. I'm innocent. Dr. Leo said, his voice low and urgent, conscious of the guard monitoring the call. He couldn't speak plainly. I need a favor. A consultation, you could say. It's about a patient's chart I've been reviewing. A very rare toxicology case. He explained in carefully chosen clinical terms that he had a series of medical notes he couldn't make sense of and needed a second opinion. He called the logbook Patient X's History. He referred to the coded entries as anomalous prescription patterns. I'm sending you copies of the relevant pages, Leo continued. There's a small independent lab I trust outside the usual channels. I need you to run the sequences. Look for synthetic peptides and beta agonists. The patterns in the chart, they form a message. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Leo could picture Finch in his cluttered office, surrounded by books and anatomical models, stroking his grey beard, his mind working. A message, Finch finally said, skepticism heavy in his voice. Leo, it sounds insane. I know, Leo cut in, his desperation seeping through. But she trusted me, Doctor. Isabella. She told me only I could understand it. Please, just look at the chart. Something in his former student's voice, the desperate intelligence, the unwavering conviction, broke through Finch's skepticism. All right, son, he said, gruffly. Send me the chart. I'll look. Getting the pages out was the next hurdle. Leo befriended a prison librarian, an older woman with kind eyes, who saw the intelligence that still burned behind his prison fatigue. He told her it was research for his appeal. She, at great personal risk, agreed to mail the photocopied pages to Dr. Finch's university address. A week later, Alistair Finch sat in his office, the photocopied pages spread across his desk. He stared at the decoded message Leo had included on a separate sheet. Marcus. Doping. Tempest. Bookie. Debt. It was a narrative of profound betrayal. Finch, a man of logic, cross-referenced the chemical compounds Leo had identified with the latest pharmacological research. The boy was right. It was a sophisticated, custom-designed drug cocktail, a concoction that would push an animal to its absolute limit before causing catastrophic organ failure. It was murder on a biological stopwatch. That afternoon, Finch made a call to a woman named Clara Rivas, a private investigator with a reputation for tenacity and a complete disregard for stepping on powerful toes. He laid out the case. Rivas, intrigued by the challenge, took the job. Her first stop was the financial world. She uncovered Marcus Thorne's life, a life built on a mountain of debt. Bad investments, a failed real estate venture, and most damningly, a deep connection to a high-stakes, illegal horse racing syndicate. Marcus wasn't just a trainer. He was a gambler who had been betting against his own horses, using the doping to manipulate odds and pay off his spiraling losses. Isabella's plan to put Leo on the board would have meant regular, intrusive audits. It would have exposed everything. He had a motive far more pressing than just losing his job. Back at Windsor Stables, Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. He had won. Leo was gone. The will was being contested and would likely be invalidated, and he was in total control. but a subtle, unnerving current of change was in the air. A tenacious female reporter had been calling the stables, asking pointed questions about their veterinary suppliers. A groom who had quit a month ago was suddenly unreachable. Marcus felt the first prickle of sweat on his neck. The true assault came from the legal system. Armed with Clara's financial discoveries, Dr. Finch's scientific validation, and a sworn affidavit from the librarian who had mailed the letters, they filed an emergency petition with the court. They didn't ask for a new trial, not yet. They asked for one simple thing: a new court-ordered independent toxicology screening of the horse Tempest. Marcus's lawyers fought it with everything they had. They called it a baseless, desperate stunt from a convicted murderer. They argued it was an invasion of private property. But the judge, a woman known for her thoroughness, saw the flicker of truth in the petition. She saw the evidence of Marcus's gambling debts. She granted the order. The day the veterinary team arrived at Windsor Stables was a cold, grey afternoon. 2 veterinarians and a technician, all strangers to the stables, arrived with sealed cases of equipment. Marcus was legally required to grant them access. He stood by the paddock, his arms crossed, his face a thundercloud of fury as they approached Tempest. The horse, who had been listless and withdrawn since Leo's departure, reacted strangely. He was calm, almost cooperative, allowing the new vets to draw blood and take samples with a docility that surprised everyone. It was as if he sensed they were there to help, an extension of the only human who had ever shown him true kindness. Marcus watched a muscle twitching in his jaw. This was a complication he hadn't anticipated. He had assumed the drugs would be out of the horse's system by now. But the designer cocktail he used was known for leaving microscopic long-term markers in the tissue. He had gambled, and now he was about to find out if he had lost. The results came back 3 days later. Clara Rivas called Dr. Finch from her car parked outside the lab. Her voice was steady, but laced with the thrill of the hunt. "Alistair," she said, "we got him. It's definitive. Tempest's tissue is riddled with a custom cocktail of cardiotonic agents and synthetic adrenaline. It's been happening for years. The lab has never seen anything like it. It's a smoking gun." Finch closed his eyes, a wave of relief washing over him. "What's our next move?" "My report goes to the district attorney's office in the morning," Clara said. "They'll have enough to open a full-scale investigation into Marcus Thorne, his finances, and the death of Isabella Windsor." That evening, Marcus stood on the veranda of the main villa, a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand, watching the last vestiges of sunlight bleed from the sky. He had built an empire of control and fear, and now it was all slipping through his fingers. His phone rang. It was his lawyer. He didn't have to answer to know what the man would say. He could feel it in the air, in the sudden, oppressive silence of the island. He took a long swallow of whiskey, the fiery liquid doing nothing to warm the ice that was forming in his veins. Miles away in a prison cell, Leo lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling. He didn't know about the lab results, or the private investigator, or the phone calls. All he knew was that he had sent Isabella's truth out into the world. And he had faith. For the first time in years, he had a sliver of faith that her truth, once awakened, would not go back to sleep. Justice does not erase the scars. It gives them meaning. The end for Marcus Thorne did not come with a storm, but with a quiet, official finality. 2 police cruisers rolled up the long, cypress-lined driveway of Windsor Stables, their lights off their arrival, as discreet as an undertaker's. They found Marcus not in the stables, but in his office, a tumbler of amber liquid on his desk, staring out at the empire he had poisoned from within. He didn't resist. There was no outrage, no denial. When the detectives entered, he simply stood, turned and offered his wrists with a cold, almost bored resignation. The mask of the charismatic horseman was gone, leaving only the hollowed-out face of a man who had lost his final bet. The news of his arrest for animal cruelty, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice rippled through the stables, a shockwave that shattered the fragile peace. Within hours, the rest of his syndicate, the shady vets, and the powerful bookies were rounded up in a series of quiet, coordinated raids. The corrupt heart of the racing world had been exposed, but the final devastating truth was still waiting. In his initial confession, Marcus admitted to the doping, but he held fast to one story. Isabella's death was an accident, and Leo, the ambitious student, had tried to use the situation to his advantage. It was his word against a dead woman's coded message. The key to unlocking it all lay in a sealed envelope in Mr. Davenport's safe, an envelope with a single instruction, to be opened only upon the official arrest of Marcus Thorne. In an emergency judicial hearing with Leo, present in a borrowed suit that hung loosely on his thinned frame, the district attorney played the video from the thumb drive inside the envelope. Isabella appeared on the large screen. She was in her study, the fireplace crackling behind her. She looked tired, her skin almost translucent, but her eyes held an unyielding, heartbreaking resolve. She spoke directly to the camera, her voice clear and steady. "If you are watching this," she began, "it means my plan has succeeded, and it means an innocent young man has suffered terribly for it. For that I can only ask for a forgiveness I do not deserve." She laid out everything: her terminal diagnosis, her discovery of Marcus's systemic doping operation, a betrayal that threatened to annihilate the Windsor legacy of integrity. She explained that she could not go to the authorities. Marcus was too well connected, the rot too deep. They would have buried the truth and destroyed the stables in a cloud of scandal. A leader's final responsibility, she said, her gaze unwavering, is to protect her legacy, even from itself. I could not let Marcus's greed be the final chapter of our story. She confessed to her own plan, the meticulous staging of her death. She had used a fast-acting, untraceable drug to cause cardiac arrest, knowing the fall in the stall would be blamed. She had planted the syringe with a sedative, knowing Leo's fingerprints were on it from his work. She had framed him. It was a monstrous choice, she admitted, and for the first time a tear traced a path down her cheek, to sacrifice the one person I had come to trust. But I trusted him with something more valuable than his freedom. I trusted him with the truth. I knew that only Leo, with his brilliant mind and his pure heart, could decipher the message I left behind. I knew he would understand the language of the logbook. I gambled his life on the belief that he would not only clear his own name, but in doing so he would expose the real disease that was killing my life's work. She looked directly into the camera, as if speaking to Leo himself across time and space. "I'm sorry, Leo. I am so profoundly sorry. I pray you use the freedom you have earned to build something better. Be the guardian I knew you could be." The video ended. The courtroom was utterly silent. Leo sat at the defense table, tears streaming down his face, silent and hot. They were tears of vindication, of grief, of a terrible, beautiful, and devastating understanding. He understood her sacrifice. He understood her pain, and in that moment, he forgave her. The judge cleared his throat, his own eyes glistening. He struck his gavel, the sound a clean break with the past. All charges against Mr. Leo are hereby dismissed. This conviction is overturned. He is exonerated, effective immediately. You are a free man, sir. Leo walked out of the prison gates a week later. The world that greeted him was loud, fast, and alien. But standing there waiting for him was Dr. Alistair Finch. The old professor didn't say much. He just clapped a hand on Leo's shoulder, a gesture of profound respect and welcome. His return to Windsor Stables was a quiet one. The staff, now under temporary management, greeted him with a mixture of awe, shame, and reverence. He was no longer the charity case. He was the master of the estate, the keeper of the legacy. The will was clear. He had full control of the trust, the stables, the bloodline. Everything. For the first few months, he did nothing but walk. He walked the fields, the coastline, the stable aisles. He spent hours with Tempest, who was now healthy and calm, his eyes clear for the first time. The horse would rest his great head on Leo's shoulder, a silent communion of two survivors. He was learning how to breathe again, how to live outside the confines of a cage. He did not seek revenge. He did not revel in his newfound wealth. He simply sought to understand his purpose. The answer came to him one afternoon, as he stood in the small, ivy-covered chapel where Isabella had told him of her lost son. He was not just the owner of this place. He was its guardian. He transformed the stables. He sold off a portion of the international assets, using the capital to establish the Isabella Windsor Foundation for Ethical Veterinary Science, providing scholarships for underprivileged students who, like him, had a gift but no opportunity. He turned one wing of the main villa into a state-of-the-art equine rehabilitation center, offering free care to injured racehorses that other owners would have discarded. The final scene of the story takes place a year later. Leo, no longer looking like a boy, but a man who has found his place, stands on a hill overlooking the green, rolling pastures of Windsor. Tempest stands beside him, free and majestic. In the valley below, the stables are bustling, not with the tense energy of high-stakes gambling, but with the vibrant, hopeful energy of healing and learning. He holds a worn, leather-bound logbook in his hands. Justice had not erased his scars, but it had given them meaning. He had lost 10 years of his life, but he had inherited a purpose that would last a lifetime. He had fulfilled Isabella's last desperate wish. He had honored her true legacy, and in the quiet whisper of the Mediterranean wind, he finally felt at peace. In the end, what a profound and haunting truth. Sometimes the most painful betrayals are born from the deepest trust. Leo was given justice, a future and a legacy, but he was also left with the ghost of a terrible sacrifice, a freedom bought with a pain that would never fully fade. It leaves us with a difficult question. If you were in Leo's shoes, could you truly forgive Isabella for using you in her final desperate plan, even knowing it was the only way she saw to protect what she loved? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe the most powerful stories are the ones that challenge our ideas of right and wrong, make sure to subscribe and join our community for what comes next.